more than the model itself. Nvidia reported taking Claude Opus 5 from 30% to a perfect score on ARC-AGI-3's public set without changing the model itself. The software around it gave the model memory, tools, and supervision that the raw model by itself lacked. So what does this actually mean? The model is becoming just one ingredient, and the real advantage of this transition goes to systems more people can build and share. That's today's lead. Also in today's episode, labs without a public containment plan, an AI power rush straining the grid, robotaxis reaching fleet scale, and audiences building their own way to check synthetic media. Come with me, let's get into it. Any lab counting on its model weights alone to hold a lasting lead just got some really bad news. So how did Claude Opus 5 jump from 30% to 100% without any change to the model itself? The test was ARC-AGI-3. It gives an AI two-dimensional games with no instructions and makes it learn just by playing. Memorizing past answers, therefore, doesn't help much here. In ARC Prize's July 24th results, Opus 5 led the tested models with a score of 30%. The OpenAI models in that same comparison scored below 10%. And then Nvidia put Opus inside a custom harness. And that is the software wrapped around the model, tools and memory, and a supervisor that watches the agent while it works. Adel El-Halak, who leads product for Nvidia AI, said people usually treat an agent almost as an API of the model. In other words, you put in a prompt and you get back the answer. Nvidia built a more active system instead. The supervisor, El-Halak, said, almost acts like a CEO to nudge the agent when it goes off direction. So picture a brilliant navigator with no map, no notebook, and no lookout. The harness gives it all three. The navigator itself, though, doesn't change, but the journey changes completely. And the settings were important too. A harness roughly tripled the OpenAI system scores, though none of those hit 100%. Also, Databricks separately found that picking a harness can double what it costs to finish the same task. Nvidia plans to release its underlying system as open source under the Nemo brand. El-Halak said, "We are demonstrating with the ecosystem how open harnesses allow you to turn a lot more knobs to drive up that accuracy." And this idea is already moving beyond just the benchmark. Slack launched code channels where engineers and AI agents can write, review, and ship software together, so collaboration built right into the software. Here's how Slack's Rob Seaman put it. AI only creates value when it's part of how a team actually works, not just something that people go do alone in another lab. So for you, what matters now is where capability actually comes from. Does an open harness wipe out the Frontier Labs edge? No, not quite. The base model still made a difference. Raw Opus did beat every other tested system, remember, and using the same wrapper on other models did not get the same result. Compute, judgment, and careful engineering still limit what's possible, but that lasting advantage now looks much weaker. Most people still can't afford to train a frontier model. Far more builders can now download scaffolding, change its memory, and add a supervisor. That gives smaller teams a real way in. They can take a capable model and change how long it works, what it remembers, when it checks itself, and how much the task costs. The expensive model then becomes just one part of a system, and the rest of that system can spread fast. And what Nvidia is actually doing shows the tension here. They are opening up this AI capability to more people, while also buying electricity assets upstream to lock in its own power supply. One move lets more people take part, the other move protects a scarce physical advantage, power itself. And as the wrapper around the model gains more power, testing the model alone isn't enough for safety. Safety checks have to cover the whole working system, but this is a big leap forward. All right, that extra capability makes it riskier to rely on an agent whose permissions, memory, and goals can change mid-tasks. So what happens if one of these systems starts working against human control? Guidelight, which is an independent standards group, asked 5 frontier labs for public answers. It defined a containment plan as an agreed-upon response, which permissions to revoke, who can still use the model, and when the lab pulls it fully offline. And most labs had shared very little. OpenAI scored highest with 3 points out of 5. Anthropic came in near the top, and Meta ranked near the bottom. Stephen Adler, a former OpenAI safety researcher who now works over at Guidelight, said that there is good reason to think leading models are misaligned in some sense. Google and OpenAI said that their public documents don't cover work that they are doing internally. OpenAI described a process for pausing workloads, limiting deployment, or taking the model fully offline, and we have applied it. it. Meta wouldn't even confirm that it has a plan in general. Now, that silence hides a really uncomfortable incentive. Attorney Lily Lee explained that if a lab later falls short, then a detailed public promise can be used as evidence against it in a deceptive marketing case. So, the legal system ends up rewarding companies that promise less. And then OpenAI reversed course and stopped opposing California's SB 53. The company asked lawmakers to strengthen the bill instead by requiring monitoring during training and evaluation and cybersecurity across the whole development process. They cited recent incidents, including the case where their own model acted outside a test environment and compromised Hugging Face systems during evaluations, as you might remember. Reporters provided yet another check. They tried 10 times to push Anthropic's Opus 4.6 into explicit content, and it worked. All 10 times. The older Opus 3 and Haiku 4.5 models also failed the same test. Now, Opus 4.7 and Opus 5 resisted those attempts, but those older exposed versions are still available through the major cloud services. This shows the tension in trying to fix newer models, but leaves the gap open for the old ones as well. That's part of this development process. But for everyone outside these labs, the real breakthrough is that we have a scorecard at all. Can we just trust a company's own account of its safety work? Probably not. These companies might actually have a stronger safety plan than they're willing to publish. Legal risk, though, gives them a real reason to keep the details private, and publishing every safeguard in detail could create its own security problems. But keeping it private is not a substitute for a commitment that outsiders can actually check. So it's notable that OpenAI asked for stronger rules because companies rarely volunteer for tighter limits. That still doesn't prove, of course, OpenAI's motives, or that its preferred rules are actually enough. Guidelight changed the incentive simply by grading how much labs disclosed. Now, staying silent earns a visibly low score. A lab can still claim its internal system works beautifully, but outsiders can now point to what it actually promised in public. That is how oversight starts to move outside the company's control, and people are now demanding that same outside scrutiny for the physical power system feeding the whole industry as well. All right, so those public promises do matter on the power grid too, like I just said, where local communities can end up carrying the cost and the pollution of decisions that were made far away. Why is it that chip makers are suddenly putting money into electricity projects? One industry estimate puts the cost of a single gigawatt-scale data center at about $50 billion. Roughly $35 billion of that goes toward the chips alone. Compared to that, electricity looks cheap. The hard part is actually getting connected to the grid. In Texas, ERCOT is auditing up to 300 large projects, as we talked about yesterday. Each of these are at least 75 megawatts, and most of them are proposed data centers. Those projects are part of requests totaling 474 gigawatts. That is more than 5 times the grid's record peak demand. And ERCOT itself says much of that queue is speculative. An interconnection queue is just the waiting line for permission and equipment to even connect to the grid in the first place. ERCOT now forecasts large load demand out to 2032. Nvidia responded by taking a minority stake in Cloverleaf Infrastructure, which is a company founded in 2024 to speed up connections between utilities and data centers. Nvidia also invested $1.5 billion in SB Energy for an OpenAI-linked project in Ohio. Older power plants are being brought back online too. Operators are bringing back cogeneration, capturing and reusing heat that a power plant would otherwise waste at thousands of American sites. Meanwhile, some large gas turbines now take up to 7 years to deliver. Rural electric cooperatives want the federal government to scrap a 2024 rule that requires carbon capture on the hardest-running gas plants by 2032. Their trade group says the rule doesn't work for data centers running almost all day every day. That demand may never let up. The proposed answer still decides who lives with the pollution. The fastest hookup often goes to a gas plant built where residents have the least power to oppose it. ERCOT's audit is due to be filed on December 10th. The audit's first job is to separate projects likely to get built from mere reservations that are holding a spot in the line. So this build-out does affect your power bill, your air, and which communities get asked to host the equipment behind AI. So should the answer be to just stop building? A total halt would lock in today's scarcity and hand companies that already have compute an even bigger edge. Meeting rising demand requires more generation, more wires, more storage, and faster permitting. A huge electricity figure alone tells us very little unless we ask where that load sits and who pays for it. The fair test has to be local and specific. Does the project pay for the capacity it needs? Can people actually see the terms? Who gets the cleaner air and who gets the plant that another community turned down? Once permitted and connected to the grid, solar paired with storage can sometimes go up in just 12 months. That gives operators a route that they're accountable for. They don't have to wait 7 years for a gas turbine that's dirtier anyway. Then they don't have to dump pollution on the community with the fewest lawyers. Now, Nvidia's own strategy, as we just talked about in the lead story today, shows the contradiction here. They are buying access to scarce power while also publishing open software that makes capable AI less dependent on the biggest proprietary model. The company is protecting one bottleneck while helping loosen another. Now, the infrastructure does have to keep growing, but we only gain lasting benefit if that growth expands access without forcing vulnerable communities to pay for it. And on the road, another fast-growing system is already forcing regulators to rewrite the rules while it's running. All right, so as power systems get ready for more machines, riders in Nevada and Houston are watching self-driving cars enter ordinary transportation. Are 8,000 robotaxis really about to show up right around Las Vegas? Yes, Nevada's Transportation Authority unanimously approved Tesla, Waymo, and Uber to run up to that many vehicles in Clark County over the next year. Now, that figure is just a ceiling. Tesla got the largest share at 5,000, but Cybercab chief engineer Eric Early said that it's more likely near-term fleet is closer to 2,500. The Livery Operators Association opposed the permits, warning that roads could get oversaturated. Regulators should scrutinize how much road capacity this adds, and the group also represents the existing for-hire drivers who will face new competition once autonomous fleets arrive, so they do have that motivation. Houston has already moved past this invitation-only stage. Waymo opened its Houston service to everyone after saying more than 100,000 people had joined the city's interest list since February. But at the same time, Tesla recalled about 2,740,000 China-built Model 3 and Model Y cars made from 2019 to 2025. Driver attention was the issue. Tesla's system only checked for pressure on the steering wheel. Regulators called that insufficient and required an over-the-air update that watches the driver's eyes through the cabin camera. And then American safety regulators prompted a broader autopilot safeguards recall in late 2023. Some owners had beaten the old check by propping $20 doll heads against the wheel. The same day, Tesla also announced a door release recall, and together, the two recalls covered more than 5.7 million notices, counting overlapping vehicles. And the door handle recall was Tesla's largest ever in China. So if you ride in one of these cars, you need oversight that can change as fast as the software does. Can regulators certify a system once and call the job done? That approach works really poorly for cars that keep getting updated after they leave the factory. A hands-on wheel check can look fine right up until people learn to trick it. A permit can cap a fleet size without predicting exactly how many cars will actually deploy. The answer is oversight that adapts as conditions change. China replaced an indirect check with a camera that watches the driver's actual attention. Nevada set limits that allow deployment while still keeping fleet size bounded. Houston moved from a wait list to public access after running a limited service first. Now, none of these choices guarantees safety, but they do show that regulators are learning to keep pace with the technology instead of just treating approval as a one-time stamp. Incumbent operators can still point to real problems like crowded roads, for example. Their commercial interests, though, shouldn't be able to veto broader public access. And in Houston, anyone can now request a ride that used to require an invitation. That is what moving from pilot project to real infrastructure looks like. More people get access, more regulators adjust their oversight as evidence comes in from actual use. Now, as AI reaches more ordinary parts of life, the next challenge is figuring out when it shaped what we are seeing. All right, so once synthetic work can show up anywhere, readers, listeners, and creators are at risk whenever the sponsor or the origin stays hidden. So who decides what counts as AI-made, AI-assisted, or just unwanted? The old answer relied on production being expensive. A premium art book, a polished professional post, or a major creator promotion used to tell people that someone had actually checked the work. That shortcut no longer works. Pangram found that 41% of long-form LinkedIn posts were fully machine-written. Now, Pangram has its own pretty major problems, honestly, about whether or not it's truly something that is AI written, but still take the number for what it's worth. Filmmakers Maddie Hapoja and Sam Kolder faced backlash for promoting Higgsfield and Seedance 2.5 without disclosing they were sponsored by AI platforms. Higgsfield later confirmed that they were paid in cash and platform credits. Marquis Brownlee also pushed back on the idea that generative AI is just the next camera. He pointed to human-made work that trained the AI without crediting the people who made it. Then the official art book for Spider-Man Brand New Day shipped, with images showing warped taxis and melting fire escapes, very clearly AI-generated, and it appeared inside a premium book tied to a $2 billion franchise. Apple Music is now adding labels that disclose AI involvement in its distributed tracks. Later this year, providers will be able to mark tracks made with AI. Apple executive Oliver Schuster says more than a third of monthly submissions are fully AI-generated, but those tracks make up less than 0.5% of listening. Apple is also joining Spotify and music industry groups to separate fully generated work from AI-assisted work instead. But the fastest growing check on all of this came from readers themselves. LinkedIn's Seems Like AI Slop button hit 1 million clicks within 2 weeks of launching. LinkedIn's chief product officer said that flagged posts got 40% fewer views. So what does this mean? You are now taking on a role that used to belong almost entirely to platforms and professional reviewers. Does a crowd-run flag turn into censorship? It would be unfair if a few users' accusations automatically wiped out someone's work. Detection also can't tell you whether a post is useful, thoughtful, or true. Where something came from doesn't by itself decide its value. But on the other hand, this system does not hand every judgment to one central classifier working in secret. Readers flag whatever they came across. The platform then shows everyone the shared signal. Authors do feel the response as reduced reach for their posts. People who are shown the content can watch it themselves. And that matters because AI can generate content faster than any central review team can check it. 1 million readers can catch problems that no single gatekeeper could inspect post by post. Now, the backlash over sponsorships makes the same point. Hidden payment and missing disclosure caused the problem. Apple's labels fix a similar gap in music. The goal is a record that people can check detailed enough to tell assistants apart from full generation. Synthetic media showed how much trust had really depended on cost and habit and prestige. But now audiences are building, however imperfectly, a replacement that can spread just as fast as the content itself. All right, let's close it for today. A model can be powerful and still be only one piece of a bigger system. Today, Nvidia's harness took a leading model from 30% all the way to a perfect score, and then Nvidia opened up the harness. That means more people can copy and test and improve this capability. The same shift showed up in accountability too. Guidelight took containment grading outside the labs. ERCOT is now checking which of these huge power requests will actually get built. Transportation regulators are updating oversight as autonomous fleets go into service. And 1 million LinkedIn users have started building a trust signal one click at a time. None of this makes the process any easier. Many models, including older ones, still fail when jailbroken. Power projects can push their costs and pollution onto people with less influence. Robotaxi oversight is still learning as passengers share the road with them. Labels and crowd flags can miss, overreach, or turn into new barriers of their own. But over time, the real advantage goes to things that people can observe and adapt and share. No single model will stay so far ahead forever. That shift already includes open harnesses, outside scorecards, public audits, changing rules, and millions of people checking what reaches them. That makes the future much harder for any single company to own. It also makes the future much bigger for everyone else to build. We'll see you tomorrow.